Back on Morning Line, thanks for joining us. News Channel 5 I-Team member Jennifer Kraus and her series piece, along with the whole I-Team Broken on juvenile crime, along with attorney Jim Todd, former prosecutor. Patsy says, get rid of the bleeding heart judges who think they are just poor little babies. Until they start spending real time in detention centers, have to pay for what they've done, they will never learn a lesson.
Two things about that. First off, the statutes don't allow a lot of time in detention, so that's a legislative problem.
Okay.
You know, Judge Calloway,
who's our current juvenile court judge here in Davidson County.
I give her a ton of credit because what I think she's doing is trying to create her own system. What she's done down there at the juvenile detention with education and the uniforms and a sense of order for the kids that are in there is fantastic, and I think she realizes that the Department of Children's Services is inadequate, and so she's keeping kids as long as she can in her detention center.
Okay.
Because that's where they're really getting meaningful help. Sort of what Shelby County used to do. Shelby County had its own fiefdom, for lack of a better term, for a long time because they didn't trust the Department of Children's Services. And so I give Judge Calloway a lot of props because she's trying her best to do what she can with limited resources.
And from what you're hearing, are there success stories coming out of this?
It depends on your definition of success stories, and I think a lot of it depends upon how quick you get the child before it's too late.
And how long you can keep them in there?
Yeah.
Let's take a call from Mark. Mark, good morning. Hi, Mark.
Good morning. How are you?
Good. Go ahead, sir.
Well, I had a couple comments. Number one, I'd like to know what has happened with the old, not belief, but fact, kids learn from what they see. So I would say we need to look at the adult system. Free releases with pretrial, ROR, repeated attempts on probation, it does not work. Deal with the adult crime and you will have the effect on juvenile crime as well. Secondly, in regard to a comment that you yourself made, Nick, was that you are tired of paying for these people with your tax dollars. I understand that. I, as a taxpayer, would rather pay that bill for the rest of my life than to see one family have to bury an innocent family member. I'll hang up and listen.
I appreciate it. And look, and I understand where he's coming from. My point is I'd rather have my tax dollars spent in a way to make them contributing members of society if at all possible. Certainly not just, I don't want to pay for it, let them loose. It's like these alternatives that they've been talking about. I'm tired of just locking them up without any effort to rehabilitate. So any thoughts on what he said? Address the adult system and how it is?
Well, there's hopefully going to be sentence reform in Tennessee soon. The sentencing laws that we have now are decades old as well. In my personal opinion, having been on both sides and been in state court and federal court, is that judges need to have more discretion. And in the federal system, we have sentencing guidelines, but the judges can depart. They can depart and make it harsher. They can depart and make it more lenient. You don't have that in the adult in the state system. You have sentencing guidelines and you're mandated to follow them. And the judges, really, after they hear the entire case, hear the entire trial, hear the sentencing hearing, they're the ones that really need to make the hard decisions about whether this drug dealer needs to go to prison and for how long, or whether this drug dealer gets community corrections or probation or goes to Judge Norman's DC4, now Judge Smith is DC4. And then they keep control over them if they're on probation. So I think that's the start, is give judges more power.
All right. Do we have another clip we want to take a look at?
We do. Why don't we look at the third clip, which is Terrence McLaurin. He is the
other one.
He was the young man who was
he?
He was 12 when he was arrested for murder. And here's part of our story featuring him.
Terrence McLaurin made the deal to plead guilty to second-degree murder and spend about 11 more years in jail.
McLaurin at the time of the murder was just 12 years old. He was then the youngest person ever charged with criminal homicide in Davidson County.
McLaurin was one of two people accused of killing 40-year-old Larry Huber.
He took my brother's life, and we can't get him back. He can get out and start a new life. And my brother can't.
I told him I was sorry.
McLaurin later made amends with his victim's family and insisted he was turning his life around.
When you're a 12-year-old boy sitting in a cell, charged as an adult for first-degree murder, it feels like the whole world has turned against you.
Well, and that's probably true. He killed someone. Pretty bad. Okay.
Well, and as Jim as Jim described, and he had also shared with us, Terrence did, that he had been, repeatedly arrested for crimes and sent right back home. So he was shocked when he wound up in this jail cell and wasn't going home.
Okay, so Jim a moment ago was talking about a current juvenile court judge, and part of what these judges do is decide whether or not someone based on a crime like that should be transferred to adult court and not get out. And we see some of these folks that are arrested for murders or real serious crimes.
The decision
and there's
by statute is whether the juvenile system can rehabilitate them. That's what the judge has to look at.
Yeah.
And when you have someone with that long of a record, with that violent of a crime, usually the answer is no, based on what the department has now. If you fixed the Department of Children's Services or went to a blended sentencing model, then that decision would be a lot easier to keep them in the juvenile system. But now, with what we have, the answer is always going to be you got to transfer them because that's your only choice.
But are we transferring a ton of kids in Metro? No,
I don't know the stats.
I just don't think we are.
But how, this sounds like just a monumental task, but how big do you think, how much money and how much would it take to just transform what you're talking about?
Right.
The Sundquist Juvenile Justice Reform Commission, and it wasn't just me, it was Judge Haynes, it was Andrea Conti was on that, Chairman Trauber. It's a good group of people. And we looked at what other states were doing and came up with a blended sentencing model where a juvenile judge has a trial, not just probable cause hearing, hears all the facts, and then determines whether they should go to the adult system or stay in the juvenile system. The juvenile system jurisdiction would be extended out to 25. There would be a separate facility built for these violent juvenile offenders, and the juvenile judge would maintain jurisdiction over them for that long a period of time. Right now, if you go to the Department of Children's Services, you're getting out at 19. You can say, the hell with you every morning, I'm getting out at 19. Whereas in the blended system, the judge would bring you back in after a couple of years and say, okay, have you got your GED? Do you have a trade? Carpentry, electrical? No. Why not? Okay, apparently you don't want the blended sentencing model. I'm taking you out. I'm sending you to the Department of Corrections. Or if you're doing well, keep going, and then maybe I'll let you out and I'll continue to monitor while you're on parole. If you screw up, you're coming back in, you go into the Department of Corrections.
But you and that committee made those recommendations. What happened?
And we have a constitutional amendment in Tennessee, a constitutional provision in Tennessee that says you cannot pass a bill unless you can pay for it. And so you're talking tens of millions of dollars to build this facility, increase these jurisdictions out, and that money's just not there. Now, if analytically you looked at it and said, okay, this is going to save this much money in the long run, then maybe that's something that you could do. But again, under our constitutional system, you can't pass that legislation without the fiscal note to pay for it.
Makes you wonder, couldn't we just make an exception so, 20 some odd years later, we're not still talking about the same issue?
Yeah, exceptions to the Constitution. On top of it, though, I don't know if the political will's there for these lawmakers to say, oh, by the way, we're going to have an exception, and I'm going to use your tax dollar, I'm going to spend all this right now to do this. It always comes down to the resource.
But the juvenile justice system is the toughest place to be because they have jurisdiction not over delinquencies, child custody, child support, neglect dependent. That really, you need its own court. A long time ago, you had Department of Youth Development, right? And then they got rid of that and blended it in with the Department of Human Services and made the Department of Children's Services, which again creates a bigger problem there because the Department of Children's Services has jurisdiction over neglect dependent and all those issues as well as delinquency.
And here's another question, though, is you were talking about all these things that Judge Calloway is trying here, the cutting edge, she's trying to make an effort. That's just Nashville.
Totally.
What is going on
That's a great point because these rural counties have absolutely nothing. When I was on the Juvenile Justice Reform Commission, we went to some rural county and we talked to a judge and said, what happens when a sheriff calls you up and says, hey, I've arrested a kid for armed robbery? He goes, well, I go down there and I go to the sheriff's office and I transfer him to adult court. And I say, well, doesn't he have an attorney? Doesn't he have due process? Doesn't he have a hearing? Where am I going to put him?
That seems like the exclamation point on why we need statewide reform.
These rural counties where they don't have intensive probation, they don't have drug treatment, they don't have all the stuff that we have, the question on a transfer is a lot different because what's available to them is less. And so those kids end up either in the Department of Children's Services for a lot less minor offenses or get transferred on more minor offenses because their resources are a lot less.
Let's take a call from Diane. Hi, Diane. Hello, Diane.
Yes, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, ma'am. What's on your mind?
Okay. Hi, Mr. Todd.
Good morning.
This is Diane. I don't know if you remember me or not in Judge Norman's court many, many years ago. I think my son's case was your almost last juvenile case in Judge Norman's courtroom.
Mm-hmm.
Matter of fact, you walked up to me and you shook my hand. There was a lot of us there. But what I want to say was this here. Now, the two guys that you're talking about, they're not your standard children. See, it all depends on where they come from, too.
Mm-hmm.
My children had never been in any type of trouble, period. I made a bad decision one evening of allowing them to go over to my mother's house. Mm-hmm. And she allowed them to, walk around to their friend's house because we hadn't been too long moved. A Mexican gentleman accosted them. Things happened.
Mm-hmm.
Should it have gone a different way? I'm not sure because my children, they wasn't street runners, so they didn't know how to deal with a situation like that. But the point that I'm trying to make is this. The younger son was tried within the juvenile system,
mm-hmm.
in which he did, I think, maybe like 30 days in juvenile. He was tried within the juvenile system. The oldest child, who was, I think, 14 when it happened, he was held on until he started growing a goatee, mustache, and all that. By the time he was transferred over to the adult system, he looked like a grown man and still walking around with a child. Man,
Mm-hmm.
but they did good. They had in-house arrest. They had a good probation officer that would come to the house to check on them being under arrest. I played no games with my children, period. Okay, this has happened. You're not going to be in my home and think that we're going to minimize this or anything like that. This could have been done a little bit better. The point I'm trying to make is the one who stayed off in the juvenile system, he turned around and finished up high school and everything, went right on back. You understand what I'm saying?
Yep.
To life. Mm-hmm. The one who was transferred to the adult system, even though he was sent back to the home, he turned around, and by this here time, they're telling him, okay, find a job or get probation violation. Well, as soon as he write down that he's got a charge, bam, no job. So that's a catch-22 right there. I know because I'm the one who's taking him.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, ma'am, for your call. And that's a great example. Do you happen to recall that case?
Vaguely, and I think obviously she's a better foundation, so those kids had better foundation
they have a loving
to support
mother
them
who's
too.
involved. Yeah.
Regarding her point about the jobs, it is so tough. You represent people like I do now, and a lot of people, and you expect them to succeed after they have this conviction, and then they can't get hired. That's why I'm just such a firm believer in carpentry, electrical, mason, things like that, where you can be your own boss, and you don't do a background check on yourself. But there's just so many people who are making so much money in construction, and it's not sexy, but it's certainly more lucrative than some of the jobs that they can get.
Yeah.
Listen, let's take a break on that. We'll come back, our final segment. Another segment we can show, a clip that Jennifer has, as well as more of your calls and comments on Facebook at newschannel5.com right after this. Stay with us.